Hi friends, I'm Sarah from Sunset Bow Tarot, and today I wanted to do a VR to Kelly Bear's tag, top 5 tarot decks that you can't live without. I know that this is an older tag that was started, I want to say back in 2016 or something, but it's been going around again, and I never had the opportunity to respond to it before, so I thought it would be really fun to get on and talk about my top 5 tarot decks that I can't live without. Now, here's what I will say. I cheated so egregiously on this because as I was going through and thinking about my top 5 tarot decks that I can't live without, I was, thinking about the decks, first of all, that I'm most connected to. And I was going through those decks and thinking, okay, yes, these are the decks that I'm most connected to. But then I realized how many of the decks that I'm most connected to and that I personally couldn't live without for myself are decks that I never, ever, ever read for other people with. The decks that I can't live without in terms of reading for myself and the decks that I can't live without in terms of reading for other people are almost completely mutually exclusive lists. The decks that I read for myself are so personal to me in a lot of cases that I would never get them out to read for another person, whereas there are decks that I read for other people with constantly. Like if I'm doing a reading for another person, these are the decks that I pull out, and I know that I couldn't have any kind of tarot business or be involved in the world as a tarot reader without having copies of these decks, but they're not ones that I usually pick up to read for myself. So I decided to make 2 separate lists of 2 top 5s. So I got the top 5 tarot decks for me and the top 5 tarot decks to read for other people. So I'm going to start with the top 5 tarot decks to read for me. So my number 1 top tarot deck to read for me is the Touchstone Tarot by Cat Black. Now, this deck is out of print, but I just recently heard word that it's been picked up by US Games and is going to be coming out in a mass market edition next year, which I am so thrilled about, you guys. I was so happy to see that. I think this deck is amazing. I think it's wildly underrated. I think it's Cat Black's best deck, and I've never fully understood why this one is out of print while the Golden Tarot, which is also wonderful, also a wonderful deck. It's Cat Black's other deck, but that one is a US Games deck, and this one was just out of print for so long. So the whole thing never made much sense to me, so I'm so excited that US Games has picked up both of them now. And so the Touchstone Tarot is a digital collage deck, and it's digitally collaged from all Baroque and Renaissance artwork. Cat Black's other deck, the Golden Tarot, is all medieval artwork. Look at this Queen of Wands. Oh my God, she's amazing. Anyway, that's all medieval artwork, but this one is all Baroque and Renaissance artwork, and it's a digital collage, and it's absolutely the most amazing deck. This deck is so personal to me. I could never dream of getting this deck out to read for another person, and it's just because of the way that all of the people in the deck are looking right at you, and it feels like you have a personal relationship with them. And so this deck to me feels so personal. It's like these people are my friends, and it's just a really it's a really personal relationship that I couldn't share with another person. So this is my absolute number 1 deck to read for me. This deck is always honest with me. It's not ever easy on me. It's the kind of deck that holds me very accountable for things, and I love it so much. I think it's just wonderful. It's totally my style of artwork, and I just could not love it more. I mean, so many of the people are giving you this look like, what the shit is wrong with you? Like, it's like you feel like they're your friends, but they're also not going to take your shit. And I love that about this deck. So that's the Touchstone Tarot by Cat Black. So the second deck on my list of decks that are in my top 5 for me personally is the Tyldwick Tarot by Neil Lovell. So this is the box. Now this is another deck that's out of print. I'm sorry to be talking about so many out of print decks, guys. But this deck is amazingly special to me. I love decks that have a sense of place. I love decks that bring you into a location. And this deck is the ultimate in doing that. And if you are the kind of person like me where you love antiques, you love exploring and touring old houses, you love to see places where people used to live and to think about what their lives were like and to sort of feel like you're alone in a place, then this deck is an incredibly special one. So the Tyldwick Tarot is a deck where every card is represented, here I'll do this, every card is represented by a vignette from an old house, what appears to be like an old manor house. So some of them are interiors, you know, like this one. Others of them are exteriors. So there's some that are fireplaces, there's mausoleums, there's tables of objects, there's gardens, but you're all alone in this place. There's only one card that actually shows a person, and it's quite ghostly and scary. The court cards actually all have these as well, little portraits in the middle, but I love the court cards in particular because the kings are all represented by these sort of open, airy interiors. The queens are all fountains. The pages are all mausoleums, and the knights are all fireplaces. So you think, when you think about it, it's bringing in the element for that particular suit or court level, in addition to the element of the actual suit. So the queens are all water, the kings are all air, the knights are all fire, and the pages are all earth, in terms of how they're represented. But this deck is absolutely amazing. It gives you this incredible feeling of solitude, and it's like you're going into a place and you're understanding the meaning of the card from the place that you're in, and it's just incredible. I absolutely love this deck. It's super special. I'd never use it to read for another person, but for me it has so much very particular meaning, and I absolutely treasure it, and it's a wonderful deck. The creator of this deck, like I said, passed away about a year back, so the deck is out of print, but it's an absolute treasure of a deck. I'm so happy that I have a copy. If you ever have the really amazing opportunity to get your hands on a copy, it was very expensive new even, and I know that right now copies are probably very expensive, but it's a really worthwhile deck to have. So another deck that made the top 5 decks for my own personal use is the Greenwich Tarot. Oops, I should show the box. Here's the box. It's a Llewellyn deck, so it comes in, nowadays it comes in a nice big Llewellyn box with a magnetic flap, but it does have Llewellyn cardstock, which is a shame. But I absolutely love this deck. This deck is my hug deck. I always say it feels like living in Pagan Hobbiton. Like, look at that. This is a deck that just depicts a world where I would love to live. It's interesting because I don't consider myself a witch, but I absolutely love the feel of this deck. Every card also has a plant and an animal in it. The guidebook is really good and goes into how those plants and animals contribute to the meaning of the deck. I love the court cards in this deck. There's gender balance in the knights and pages, and it just shows these scenes of sort of everyday life in this little sort of ancient village, and I think it's wonderful. And like I said, this is a deck that I get out when I need a hug. It's got such a warm, soothing, beautiful feel to it, and I absolutely love it. So that's the Greenwich Tarot. So the next deck that is on my top 5 for me, for my own personal use, is the Pagan Otherworlds Tarot. Again, this is a deck that gives you a strong sense of place. I've said before that this deck feels like you're going on a quest. It feels like you're traveling alone through a strange land, and you're seeing all of these beautiful vignettes in the landscape. You're seeing all of these strange people, they don't feel like your friends in this deck. They feel like these sort of archetypes that all have some kind of, you know, obscure message to give you. You know, they're probably going to talk to you in the form of a riddle or something, but they all have a message to give. And I love, again, the sense of place in this deck. I love the feeling of solitude. I love the feeling of traveling. And so again, it's a deck that I really just like to use for myself, because you don't get that same feeling of solitude when you use it for other people. It's a deck that feels like it's a place where I belong and that I travel to, and where I'm the one meeting these people, and their messages are specifically for me. So I really love this one. Pagan Otherworlds. It's also like the highest quality deck I'm pretty sure I've ever had in my hands. In terms of the cardstock, it's absolutely stunning. If you've ever managed to get your hands on one of them. I think the cardstock is a little bit different now, because the one that I have, I want to say, is the second edition. I think it's an older edition, and it had this incredible linen air cardstock that feels like a very high quality playing card deck. I think that Usi is using slightly different cardstock for it now, but I'm sure it's still lovely cardstock. But I'm super happy that I have this one, because the cardstock is amazing, and it's an amazing shuffle, and it's just slippery and it feels so good. It's awesome. The final deck on my list of decks that are just for me is the Naked Heart Tarot by Jillian Wilde. Here's the box. Mine is the second edition. I believe that she's out with the third edition or fourth edition now. I can't remember. But anyway, I absolutely love this deck. This is, here are the backs. This is a deck that I'll never forget the first deck interview that I did with it, because all the mothers of the deck came out. In this edition, the court cards are the father, the mother, the youth, and the child. And my deck interview was like, all of the mothers in the deck came out. It just felt like an instantly nurturing deck. I love the artwork in this deck. It has these almost photorealistic images of mostly animals. There's some other stuff in it too, but mostly animals, with as well these kind of line drawings surrounding them. So like this one is really cool, this Nine of Wands. And you can kind of see how the animal is very fully illustrated, and then the wands are more line drawings. But it's a beautiful deck, and it has such a nurturing feel. It feels like a very kind deck to me. And I have a very strong connection with it. I absolutely love it. I think the artwork, again, is just like, look at this. Ace of Cups. It's so cool. I love this artwork. And the way that she depicts the animals, you know, so many of them just make me laugh. It has this wonderful chunky little guidebook that fits right in the box with the deck, and the guidebook is full of good information, and it's a really wonderful deck. But again, it's one where I feel like it just wants to talk to me for the most part. I don't tend to use it very much for other people. I don't know if I've ever actually used this one for another person. So it's sort of like the Touchstone that way, where I just like literally could not bring myself to ever get it out for another person. But wonderful deck. Anyway, so that's Naked Heart Tarot. All right, so now let's get into the decks that are the top 5 decks that I like to use for other people. Now these are in fact decks that I don't generally reach for a ton to read for myself, and in one case it's a deck that I never reach for to read for myself, but I reach for it all the time to read for other people. And so again, this just felt like an entirely different category of decks. You know, it's like there are the decks that I keep for my own personal use and that I would grab if I was the only person that I was going to be reading tarot for, but then there are these decks where they are decks that I don't read with for myself, but they're always the ones that I would grab to read for another person with. So the first deck I want to talk about that I use primarily to read with for other people is the Morgan-Greer Tarot. Here's the backs. So the one that I actually use the most is the Morgan-Greer in a tin, because I have that in my purse with me all the time. But since this is a video, I'm going to show you the full-size one just because it's easier to see. I have a copy of the full-size one as well. And this deck is actually in order because I'm about to film a video on the Morgan-Greer actually, but here's the cards. This deck is a great deck to read with for other people, I find. It's very Rider-Waite-Smith in terms of its depictions, but it has a little bit of a warmer feel, I find, than the Rider-Waite-Smith. It has all the same symbolism, but the people are a little bit up close and personal. The colors are very rich and warm. There's a lot of yellow, and red in this deck. And it has this funny 70s feel in a lot of ways, like the Lover's card guy. I feel like he has a hairy ass, right? Like that's what, I mean, it's crazy. Like there's all these mustaches that crack me up. And so it's a fun deck to read with for other people. I tend to feel that people respond really well to this one. It is a very traditional deck, and so it's a very easy read, but it just has this one cracks me up. I love the guy falling off the Wheel of Fortune. It has this warmth to it that I find that people really respond well to. So again, I don't pick up the Morgan-Greer a lot to read for myself, but because I have it in my purse with me all the time, I read for other people with it constantly, and it's a very easy read, and it's a great deck that people generally tend to like being read for with. So love the Morgan-Greer. It's a great deck. And it's one that I use quite a lot. So the second deck in my list of decks that I are primarily my top 5 to read with for other people is the Fountain Tarot. The Fountain Tarot, here are the backs. I use this deck to read for other people all the time. I don't think I've read for myself with this deck since like the day I did a deck interview with it. I'm pretty sure I have like never ever picked this up for myself. It reads for other people beautifully. And I don't know why, like I don't have a personal emotional connection to this deck, but it just is such an easy read to read for other people, and the aesthetics of it tend to, I think, people find really attractive generally. So I read this deck for other people so often. And it's funny, I've said before that this deck feels more like a trusted colleague than a personal friend, just because, again, it's such an easy read. It's so clear. It's so serene. It feels like, you know, if people are going through a really tough time, this deck kind of like tones down the temperature of like whatever big emotions they're feeling and helps to sort of really see things clearly. But again, I have no personal connection to this deck whatsoever. I would never reach for this for myself, ever. But the imagery is so clear in terms of reading for other people. It's a great deck. So I love the Fountain Tarot to read with for other people, and it's absolutely indispensable to me in terms of like reading for friends or like for clients. But I don't use it for myself at all, ever. Like ever, ever, ever. So the next deck on my top 5 that I use to read for other people is the Touchstone Tarot. I don't have the box, but here are the backs, and here's the pretty Peggy bag I keep it in. So the Touchstone Tarot is absolutely wonderful, and I think the reason why I particularly love this deck to read for other people, it is a collage deck, which oddly enough, I don't normally think of myself as a person who particularly likes collage decks, but I love this one. Part of the reason is because I think that there's a lot of fabric in the collage on this deck, which I really enjoy. But there's also, the images are so multi-layered, and there's so many details in these images that make the cards just really, really talkative. So when you're reading for other people, so much just jumps out of these cards that fills you in on little details that you hadn't even thought of before, and it gives you so much to talk about. Like, this is just a deck where so much meaning comes out of these cards. Like, I never ever feel stuck ever when I'm reading with this deck. I never feel like I don't know what the story is. And I think that, again, it's so multi-layered in terms of the imagery. It's beautifully done. This deck also has a lot of diversity in it, which I really love. But I mean, there's like racial diversity, gender diversity. There's also disability, different body types portrayed in this deck. Like this, I love, how amazing is this? The King of Swords has a blade prosthetic. I love that. It's so cool. So I think that this deck is absolutely marvelous. One of the other things, kind of counterintuitively, that I really love about this deck is impossible to riffle shuffle. And so I have to overhand shuffle this deck, and I am a shitty overhand shuffler. I'm so bad at it. But what that means is that when I'm reading with this deck, when I'm shuffling it, I get a lot of jumpers, and I actually tend to love getting a jumper when I'm reading for another person. I really enjoy that because, you know, when I'm reading for myself, I always have a very specific question that I want answered. And so I've designed a spread and I know what I want to ask. And, you know, I have very specific spread positions for specific things that I want to know. But when you're reading for another person, jumpers can be great because it's like they alert you to things that you didn't even think of, you know, things that maybe the person wasn't telling you, or things that are maybe aspects of the situation that aren't super visible to you. And so I actually really like that about this deck, even though it's wildly embarrassing to shuffle this deck in front of other people because I'm so bad at it. But cards jump out that almost always have something really important to say about the situation. And so I actually love the fact that I'm really bad at shuffling this deck, weirdly enough. I know that sounds crazy, but that is something that I really love about it. And I think that this deck is so multi-layered, it's so talkative, it has so much to say. Like, I love this Knight of Wands, his hair is on fire, literally. Like, it's such a great deck. It's funny and diverse and just wonderful. So I highly recommend the Texture Tarot. I reach for this deck to read for other people all the time. It has clued me in on so many surprising things every time I've ever used it to read for somebody. I love that about it. So the next deck in my top 5 that I use to read for other people is the Anna K Tarot. The Anna K Tarot is a deck that I do also reach for to read for myself, but I especially love this deck to read for other people. Those are the backs. This is actually the artist's self-published edition. There is also a Llewellyn edition of this deck, which is also nice. I don't like it as much as the self-published, but I do have a copy of the mass market edition just because I like to take this deck with me places sometimes, and I don't like to travel with my indie edition, so I have a trimmed mass market edition that I sometimes carry around with me. So the Anna K Tarot, again, I do use this to read for myself as well, but for reading for other people, this is again one of those decks that's just so talkative. It just gets into the emotion of a situation so well. There is nothing esoteric about these cards. It's just everything is conveyed in terms of emotion, in terms of lighting, in terms of color, in terms of, I mean, it's just like you feel like you know the people in this deck, and that you are able to read the cards because you understand what situation they're going through in their lives. And so it just has a really, it's just really talkative. It's such an easy deck to read. And, you know, the people in it are kind of weird looking. They have these kind of sort of homely, squashy faces. And I love that about it. I love that there are no supermodels in this deck. Everybody just looks like a normal everyday person living a normal everyday life, and look at how much emotion they have in their faces. It just conveys so much. And so again, it just makes it a really easy read when you're reading for other people. I think this deck is really wonderful. It's got so much to say. So highly recommend it. This is like one of those decks that I would always recommend to anybody. I recommend it as a beginner deck. I think it's just absolutely wonderful. And like I said, I do prefer the self-published edition, but the mass market edition is also just fine. So that is the Anna K Tarot. And of course, I have to have a Rider-Waite Smith deck on this list of decks that I read for other people with, because it's a classic, it's a go-to, it's easy, and it's something that I definitely reach for to read for other people. So the edition that I chose was actually Pam's Vintage Tarot, which is here's the backs of it. It's a wonderful edition of the Rider-Waite Smith, and it's a fun one to get out to read with for other people because they have this very aged look to them, and you know, they look like an old fortune teller's cards. So it's just a fun kind of aesthetic when you're reading for another person, and so this is one that I reach for a lot. I really enjoy this. And again, you know, the Rider-Waite Smith is a classic. It's a deck that, you know, it's an easy one to reach for, to read for other people. It's one that if I'm going to go somewhere where I know I'm going to be doing readings, I sometimes carry it with me. You know, it's just a very easy read, and the Pam's Vintage is a particularly nice edition of it. That's it's a lot of fun to have. I actually have both the full-size and pocket-size editions of this deck, and I really love it. So So again, had to have a Rider-Waite-Smith deck on this list, and the Pam's Vintage is the one that made the list. So anyway, those are my top 5 decks that I love to read for me, and my top 5 decks that I love to read for other people. I know there's a lot of other folks who have responded to this tag, so I really want to go back and watch a lot of those videos because I love these kinds of videos. So if I haven't watched and commented on yours yet, it's probably on my list that I'm going to be getting to. But anyway, thanks so much, everybody. Thanks for watching. Have a great one. Bye-bye.